Okay, the starters we've been starting recently in these sessions, all my sessions really, just with standing. And it's really a very small change from our habitual way of standing. If I come a bit closer, where we're kind of constantly straining, to this very simple but very difficult change where I just allow my hips to settle and I allow my upper body to sit in my hips. And it really does feel like, you know, when you sit into a chair, this sense of releasing. And in order to be able to do that, we need to find the right position. And that's where this exercise that I've done with you many times, just rocking your weight forwards and backwards, comes into play. We find the right position, just like, you know, put your hand on a chair to find a chair or something like that. And then allow yourself to drop down. And remember, your pelvis has to sort of tuck under. If I stand here and I pull my belly in and I tighten my back, for instance, I think, oh, all I'm going to do is drop my hips and straight away I'm falling over. What's going to prevent me doing that is allowing, not forcing, but allowing, as I sit down, and this is what would happen if you sit into a chair, to just gently tuck under. And that keeps my weight in the correct position rather than having it pull me back. So this goes against our normal way of standing, our habitual way of standing. Really, it's a good thing to do at the start of the day. Something that I always try and do at the start of the day is to remember that, oh, I don't have to be standing here like that. I don't have to be fighting just to remain upright, or at least I can move closer towards that position. So just aware of this area between hips and waist and turning, feeling the weight of your arms, swinging around. A slight pull through your shoulder joint. My first teacher, Bronwyn, used to sometimes say, imagine you're doing this with heavy shopping bags in each hand. It's quite interesting to do. If you happen to have a set of these small dumbbells, handheld weights, maybe sort of a kilo or something like that, nothing very heavy. Just letting them rest in your hands, and that can give you a better idea of the sort of momentum, that kind of energy that builds up simply from the turning in your center. So we've adjusted our posture so that our hips are looser so that we can turn in the center. We find that when we do that, there is this support within the body that is often overshadowed by a kind of tightening in our shoulders. And it's not consistent. You come into it and out of it. And this helps to create the space for movement. Going back to the basic stance, one of the things I often recommend to people, whether you think you need it or not, actually. So obviously, if your stability is poor, it's a really useful thing. But to try that standing posture with your back to a wall or sideways onto the wall or something like that, and to play around with it. And then every now and then, what will happen is you fall backwards, but it's okay because the wall's there. So you're not going to fall over. Because one of the things that we experience, one of the things that I've experienced when this starts to happen is you feel as though you ought to be falling over, even if you're not, because you've no longer got the support that you thought that you needed. And it takes a while to build that confidence. But once that starts to happen, once you say, oh yeah, I know what's going to happen now, then you're more likely to sort of come back to it during the day. The process is sometimes described as a letting go, and it's an accurate description. And I've described it before. You know, the tightly clenched fist and the more open fist. You've still got the structure there, but not the tightening, not not the gripping. It's all very well to say that, but if you've ever had the experience, maybe you've, with some friends and you climbed a tree and you're climbing down and you're kind of hanging on and you can't see the ground, and your friends are saying, just let go, because you're like an inch above the ground. And you know it's true. Your friends aren't lying to you. You know it's going to be okay, but you try letting go. You try persuading your fingers that it's okay to let go at that point. And it's very, very difficult. So in a way, letting go sounds too easy, but it is an accurate description. And one of the key areas that we're looking to let go in, both in standing and in moving, is that area, lower back, hips, buttocks, with this slight feeling of overhanging. And again, all of these things in my experience come and go. Letting that nice steady rhythm build, because the rhythm will come quite naturally when there's no restriction. And so the alignment of your body, that very slight sense of softening in your knees, trying to avoid talking about bending the knees, and that releasing in your hips and lower back. Allow for the flow of the movement, both externally, arms swinging nice and freely and so on and so forth, but also internally, a sense of movement within your body. Then that takes us into the realm of the energy, in inverted commas, or however you think about it. Try not to get bogged down too much in terminology. Use the label that best suits you at any particular time. Gradually becoming aware of areas where there isn't that flow, there isn't that sense of energy. And in the same way that we look for a feeling of releasing in the hips, that softening, it's the same thing. It's the same thing that we're trying to achieve in one way or another. And again, that could be something that requires a change in posture or how we're moving, or it could be just using some kind of image, the fist untightening, water flowing over a rock or something like that. Again, there's not one that's necessarily better than another. They should interact. We should choose the way of approaching those things in the way that best suits us. As an example, if you're doing this and you feel tight in your shoulders, you can't quite get the movement in the upper part of your back. But, well, check it. I'm leaning back, so maybe I can just bring my shoulders forward, soften the chest a bit, or it might be a structural thing. It might be more subtle than that. What it might be is a structural thing that when you've sorted that out, or begun to sort that out, reveals something more subtle. It's not necessarily one thing is going to work. We can start to bring all of these aspects into our practice, and from there, as I said, they'll spill over into our daily lives. But it's hard to think about all of that stuff when you're trying to kind of figure out whether it should be left or right or whatever. So the initial part of a class like this, and this for me is standard procedure when I start to practice in the morning, is to use an exercise like this, or simply stand, or something like this, where I don't have to think too much about what am I supposed to do next or anything like that, and then remind myself of those kind of basics. even with a faster exercise like this, we can also notice those moments of slowing down, quite fast in the middle of the movement, but definitely sort of coasting to a halt there. And there's that little point of change, that pivot point. And that's, again, I've talked about the punctuation points, the comma in the sentence. And particularly when we come to the slower movements, it's often at that stage that we return to this posture. Not just this posture, but any posture, but the feeling within the posture, the feeling of equilibrium. Central equilibrium is the label that I most commonly put on that overall feeling. And part of the Tai Chi practice, an important part of it, one of the most crucial parts of it, is can we, as we go through different movements and so on, maintain central equilibrium? Raising your arm. Think about, how do I bring my arm to this position without straining legs? Oh, I'm going to lift my arm up. And how I do it, I let the elbow drop, and then that also engages other parts of the body. Muscles certainly, but the whole kind of fascial layer, tendons, ligaments, and the energy itself. It's not just about movement. And when we start to apply an image like moving through water, we realize we start to get this sort of denser feeling, almost like a balloon filled with water. So that quality of inner strength, which starts in the legs, in the center of the body, gradually spreads out. Let your hands drop down. So I'm presenting this to you as, oh, you do this, and then that happens. What does it was so simple? The truth is, this is what I'm talking about is a process. We're constantly losing central equilibrium. We're constantly trying to get it back, and refining things, and so on and so forth. It's arguably, well, for me at any rate, in where I am in Tai Chi, that is what Tai Chi is about. It's not that I'm able to maintain these qualities the whole time. Far from it. But it's the recognition that this is what I can come back to. So let's do this little exercise, swaying in the river. Just start off by letting your weight roll forwards and backwards in your feet. And I've talked about this before. If I use the pole as a representation of the center line of my body, it's this that I'm trying to do, not this, but trying to maintain that posture at a slight angle. Clearly, if I go forwards too far, that's what's going to happen. But one other thing to think about here, if you look at the pole, I'll have it separate there. When I move it forwards and backwards, compare how far the top of the pole here is moving to how far the bottom bit of the pole is moving. I'm not doing anything with, it's rigid. I'm not doing anything clever or bending it or anything like that. It's not a magical pole. It's just a bit of wood. Nice bit of wood, but it's just a bit of wood. So if I wanted to, I could get this amount of movement in the top of the stick by going down here, and it's a bit big to do, it'll probably drop on my head, but just take it at the bottom and move it very, very slightly, and I would get all that movement. And in the same way, that small amount of movement in your feet, as long as you've got the integrity of the structure, is creating a lot more potential for movement as it moves up through your body. Looking for the central point, but also now bringing your arms in to the movement. I call it swaying in the river because you imagine that you're standing in a river, moving against the flow of the water. And a key thing here is to maintain that awareness of your whole structure and what's happening in your feet, and to let that move your arms. As soon as we start to do this, then I'm starting to lose the posture. But if I move from here and I feel the expansion through the body, I can get to there. But if I put my arms there, it stiffens up in my back and everything. So reminding ourselves to move from the ground. The ideal point of alignment, the ideal place, which as always may not be comfortable, but it's the point at which the crown of my head gets above point just, well, if I stand like this, if I imagine a line from the balls of my feet, it'll be in the middle, but just behind that line. So in a moment, what we're going to do is when we get to that line, rather than maybe going a bit further forwards or just going back, again, I'll exaggerate. I get to there, you see I'm leaning forward, and instead of moving my weight more, I actually let my hips sink. That brings me to the upright position, and that will lead me into the rooting down exercise. So, hand beside you, bowing, and then next time you come forwards, you start to bring your hand in as though you're cradling the ball. Feel your hips starting to drop at the appropriate point, and we're into rooting down. We've changed the horizontal movement to a vertical movement. But remember, we didn't have to work that hard to move the weight in our feet. We didn't have to make it a big movement or a complicated movement to generate the movement, the energy working up through the body. And so the same kind of gentle, almost minimal effort as we start to feel our feet pushing down into the ground. The phrase in Tai Chi is that 4 ounces will move or overcome 1,000 pounds. Change into the wild goose. When you sink down, when you get to here, don't come straight up again. Give yourself that little very slight, that slight break, and try and get into the habit that when you do that, just for a moment, you're coming back to central equilibrium. As you get more used to it, you'll find that it really just requires the intention for that to happen, and your body will adjust. And then heart in the clouds. One more time. And at the end of the last one, go back to rooting down, coming into building this into a sequence. And as you push up in rooting down, just be aware of the expansion in belly and lower back, and then draining away. As you start the wild goose, the same thing, moving up into the solar plexus. And then belly and solar plexus and chest, And the aim, if you like, the intention here is to use this set to produce, through the combination of physical movement and intention, that expansion, rising up stage by stage through your body, and that will move your arms for you. So we start off by moving the body from the outside, if you like. We notice what happens, we observe what happens within our body, and we focus more on that. And gradually, again, the sort of nature of the movement changes. An additional thing with this particular set is, if you want to think about your breathing, that order of expansion, belly, solar plexus, chest, is what we would want to look for in the most basic, the most important, really, in many ways, breathing method of abdominal breathing, or bellows breathing, of using the expansion of our body to open up the whole body and to draw the air down into our lungs. So if you want to practice that, just build it up slowly, feel the expansion through the first two movements and indeed the third movement. Don't really, just let your body breathe naturally at this stage. But then as you start parting the clouds, just see how it feels to deliberately take a breath in. You don't have to do it every time you get to this part either. And you don't have to do it, don't hold your breath or anything like that. Breathe out when it's comfortable. Just introducing the idea of the abdominal breathing, the bellows breathing, and seeing how that works and interacts with both movement and posture. So do one more round. And see to what degree whatever you got from what I've been saying continues to work within the different exercises. One more set. Also one more on each side. And then change into pushing in 4 directions. Try not to strain in the back or your shoulders as you make the turn, so don't turn too far. Remember, 4 ounces will move 1,000 pounds. A small amount of movement in the center of your body can lead to a much bigger movement in your hands and your fingers. As long as that movement is given a chance of relatively free passage through your body. One more round. And then changing and at the turn, it's comfortable. Again, not straining. Change sides. Add in the turn. Now, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Again, hips dropping back, feeling your head floating up. And then polishing the table. Okay. And then just give you this. So we're going to look at part of the wild horse's mane, and the transition into this slightly more complicated movement of white ape off this fruit. What I want to get across actually is this idea of 4 ounces moving 1,000 pounds. That principle can be applied in lots of ways. So what can look like quite a big thing, oh, what's he doing now kind of thing. Actually, when we can bring that idea to a sort of sense of problem solving in a way, it can often simplify things and make things a lot more accessible. So go into the rider stance, horse riding stance, if that's comfortable for you, and just get the weight moving across a little bit, 60% into each leg, and then turn in. Hands in front of you. There's a movement through your arms and your hands. And then this time, go from your right foot into your left foot and let that movement go to here. Turn your right hand palm down. Now in this position, we can feel an expansion in that side of the body, very similar to my mind to Dragon Plucks the Stars from the Sky. Then we come back and go across. And the same thing here. We also have an expansion across the chest. And that contracts as we come across. And again, you know, we can think of parallels in movements like pigeon spreads its wings, for instance. When the chest contracts, it draws the arms in. And remember, Tai Chi will always follow this pattern of yin-yang. Expansion leads to contraction, contraction leads to expansion. Because as you do this, feel what's across your back, again, there's the expansion. And so you maintain that expansion across the back there, and then that contracts, and so that helps to bring your arm out. But there's all sorts of little processes within your body that are part of this movement. And if we wanted to correct the movement in one way or another, we would always look first to the feet and the weight and the center of the body. And rather than trying to kind of juggle the arms, we would actually be looking at, well, you know, is my chest expanding? You know, can I change that? Those things are often more likely to be changed through our attention, through our intention. And if nothing else, it maintains a kind of calmer quality for me. Now this time though, we're going to go into white ape off his fruit. So we've got this position here. And what we would do for part of wild horse's mane is we would contract in the chest and we would move the weight across and the center would turn. We do basically the same thing. We let the chest contract, and notice that brings your arms closer together. We let this expansion in the side of the body contract, and that brings the elbow down, and we don't move the weight. So we do one thing less in a way, and that brings our right hand close to the left elbow. Fingers point down. Having got to this point, imagine your fingers are stuck in mud and you're going to pull up and back slightly, pull the fingers out of the mud, and then you drop down again to here and you turn towards the left. And as you turn, you rotate the hands so it's like they're holding the fruit. And then you go forwards. Make the change to the other side. You come across, bringing your hands across. You drop the right hand down. So the hand on the side that you've moved to, you scoop under to hold the ball. Here's part of the wild horse's mane, chest open. And you sink a little bit more in the left, close the chest. You can turn slightly. And then you position the hand. and you get used to coming into this position. Pull back, over and down, you turn slightly towards the right, and you push in. So we haven't made huge changes here. We go into the left. Now it's going to be the hand on that side, the left hand that scoops under. And if anything, the main thing is that here, you don't necessarily have to think about anything else other than letting the chest close. And that does most of the movement for you. Yes, we want the elbow to drop. And yes, you can turn a little bit, and that all complements the movement. But then we've already started. Over and then down. So interestingly, we've moved into a more complex exercise by doing one thing less, which I think is typical of Tai Chi in many ways. More is less and less is more is apparently a Chinese proverb that is often associated with Tai Chi. The white ape offers fruit. Because it's that little bit more complex from the outside, we have a little bit more opportunity to just feel subtle changes within the body as we make the movements. So you could see this almost as a halfway stage between the individual exercises and the Tai Chi forms. You don't have quite the same issue of remembering the next sort of 30 or 40 movements as you would do in a Tai Chi form. And yet you've got a variety and the contrast to help you just to take your attention and your intention somewhat deeper into your body. So even if you're not proficient in this exercise, you're thinking, oh, I don't quite get this. Actually, it's the effort that you're making where the real benefits are. Of course, we want to be able to do the exercise. It's a matter of time and practice. It'll come in time as you get used to the pattern. But that doesn't mean that you're not benefiting from it. One more. And then shake out. So that's white ape offers fruit. Quite often, I think one of the benefits of the more complicated movements is that the other movements become much more accessible. And the best example I had of that was the first time I taught the fixed step, in fact, the seated version of Part the Wild Horse's Mane. Somebody came up at the end of the class. I mean, it was hilarious, really, because I hadn't taught it before, and they hadn't done it before. Everybody was fine with it, but I wasn't expecting much in terms of an outcome at that point. And somebody came up to me at the end of the class. We always do some stand-in, some step-in, the stepping that we're about to do. And she was saying that although she was all over the place and she couldn't follow that movement at all, when she came to stand up and do the step-in, she felt much more confident in doing it. And this is all from her. I had no idea she was going to say this. It never occurred to me that this was going to happen. And she said she felt that she was stepping better and standing better because she had to concentrate on Part the Wild Horse's Mane. So she made the link between making the effort, not achieving the exercise, but making the effort to achieve the exercise, straight into being able to walk better, which I thought was quite remarkable, really. It showed this value of the way we work with the body mind in Tai Chi, and the outcomes we can get at it. So it can be frustrating with a complex movement. You haven't quite got it. It can be that. Sometimes it can take months to pick up an exercise, and it's very satisfying when you think, yeah, I can do this. But it's not all about being able to do the exercise. It's about the benefit you get from trying to get there. Now, have one foot forwards and begin to transfer your weight, giving yourself that moment of punctuation, not dashing into the next movement. You go back, you release, you just find that possibility of central equilibrium again. You go forwards, releasing the hip and knee, and so on and so forth. And keep that feeling of your hips dropping back. That's the thing that will stabilize you. So as you go into your back foot, feel the hips dropping back, and imagine that your hips dropping back and your front toes are like either end of a seesaw. As one end goes down, the other end comes up, your toes are there. Same thing here, hips drop down, heel comes up. So associate in your mind this paired movement. There is no up without a down. And then stepping in. On the other side. But that association between up and down, between hips and toes, or whatever, is another thing that gradually begins to integrate with our everyday movements. Raising toes and heels, hips sinking. And one of the obvious benefits there is that we remain more stable as we start to move our legs, but also that there's less strain because of that greater stability. And then stepping in. And then take a few steps through, either forwards or backwards, depending on where you've got the space. I always have my front feet slightly turned out when I do it this way. That opens up my hip, makes it easier to drop the weight. Go back. Not everybody will do that. And you need to be careful that you don't want the foot right out there. It's only a slight angle. It doesn't take much, mostly, to open up your hip a little bit more. And bring your feet out. So we have various components. The things that I've been describing, I've described them before, like bricks in a wall. And when we start to bring them together and they start to interact, that's when we start to get the wall. So, for instance, If I'm doing, say, pushing wave here, I can get to this point and I'm looking ahead and I'm moving forwards and backwards. My hands are going forwards and backwards, but they're also curving up. And I start to get that feeling again of an expansion, maybe in my side, or you might experience it somewhere else. So if I want to change from this to wind blows the willows, all I've got to do is turn and see how that's moving my hand. So it's like, oh, okay. So it's very, very simple. So try not to do this. Oh, he's doing wind blows the willows. What do I do now? That's juggling the hands around. So here, one thing really initiates the movement, and that's turning. Once we've got that, it's like, oh yeah, there's a progression here. There's a pathway here. Again, you know, something that could look quite complex, we look for the simple elements, and those are the things that we would look to bring about the change with. So have your right foot forwards. Let's start with fisherman cast a net, which, and again, a nice simple exercise that gives you the opportunity just to pay attention to what's happening in your sides, your back, your chest. Where do you feel the expansion? Where do you feel the contraction? Remind yourself of that feeling of your hips sinking. When we make a transition into something like Dragonfly Skims the Water, we want that working for us. Do one more. Change into pushing wave. As your hands go up, can you feel your hips sinking down? This time we go forwards and turn. The wind blows the willows. And yes, there are adjustments with arms and hands and so on and so forth. But they come after the fundamental change. Hips still sinking down. So this time, hips sink down, your back heel comes up, and your foot comes in. And then sink down in the back, turn, use that sinking down to bring the front foot in. And then maybe, not just in, but up. The rising of your foot, a response to the sinking in your hips, like the seesaw. Good. And shake out. Put your left foot forwards. Remember, give yourself that little moment of settling in each leg. Hips sinking down as your hands swing up. Changing this time to pushing wave. And you know, if we have this idea that we want our hands to go up a bit higher, the shape of the movement of the arms helps. But actually, for them to go higher, I need to release more in my hips. And we stay in the front leg and we turn. We let that turn sort of separate the hands. and the hips hanging back and down. So the hips dropping back, raise your toes, helps the foot to come in, stepping carefully. And then maybe raising, maybe not. But if you do that and you get a kind of little wobble, experiment, what happens if you can just release in your hips a bit more? But again, remember, it's very difficult to do that if you're kind of stiffen up. Again, it's that letting go. So again, it might be, well, actually, there's a wall here. Oh, right, you can build your own confidence with this. And then stepping through into dragonfly skin of the water. If you haven't done so already, the next step, change direction. Always remember that whilst I'm doing this straight forwards and backwards, you could choose to change direction if it's appropriate. One more time. And then the Chinese term Wu Wei is often used to describe this kind of approach, often translated as actionlessness or effortlessness, which it clearly is neither. More accurately, but confusingly translated as the effort of non-effort with the action of non-action or non-doing, so on and so forth. I like to think of it as appropriate effort, appropriate action. Somebody, I think it was one of the Greek philosophers, once said, give me a place to stand and a lever and I'll move the world. In other words, this idea of 4 ounces overcoming 1,000 pounds. It's like, oh, I've got to do dragonfly skin with the water and I'm all over the place. Stage by stage, settle into the leg, turn, feel the hips sinking back. Let that start to move your leg point and so on and so forth. So rather than trying to go from sort of here to here, we go through a series of stages. What I mean about the idea is kind of problem solving. There's a different mental approach as well as a different physical approach. Rubbing your hands together and tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. And the other side. And your back. Around your hips, your legs. Belly. And the upper part of your chest. So in this class, what we've done is we've gone from just that basic standing and looking at that slight change, and by kind of layering up other changes through the body, we got to something quite complex and quite demanding physically and so on and so forth. The concept of Wu Wei is sort of like opens up in a Chinese work called the Tao Te Ching And a line in that particular work, it's a very well known line, it's often quoted in other contexts, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So again, you know, this idea of, in a way, problem solving. The problem, how do we move around in our lives without damaging our bodies, without causing strain and stress, not just on our bodies. And awareness and intent and all of those kinds of things can combine to help us find these kinds of softer pathways, I suppose you could call them. So coming back to standing, that makes one of the most important things that we do, this returning, because we will lose it. We know that, but we can get it back. And so, you know, embrace tiger, return to mountain really encompasses that idea. So sinking down, pushing up, bringing your arms around, and in. So one thing not to do at this point is to rehearse in your mind why tape offers food. You think, I really want to learn that. What I've got to do is, yeah, I've got to remember not to turn. I've got to put my hand here and so on and so forth. Because this is the start of the process. And just remind yourself, you know, this, I'm recording the lesson. It'll be up on YouTube. So you can always go back to it and think, oh, okay, I'll go back to it tomorrow or something like that. Wait till the next class, and so on and so forth. But sort of trying to grasp too hard after it isn't going to work. Just focus on that key stage, the releasing, the sinking back down into central equilibrium. And then stand. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. So just a reminder, no class this Monday, or indeed the following Monday, which is a bank holiday, but Thursday classes continue as normal as it gets. Hopefully see you at one of those.